meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Now, many car manufacturers prior to World War I began with not one engineering genius at the helm, but two. Panhard and Levasseur is a classic example of this, and where would Daimler have been without Maybach? And of course, this kind of partnership happened in America as well. And so we're going to look at the man who was the other certified genius behind the Ford Motor Company, Harold Wills. Child Harold Wills hailed from Fort Wayne, Indiana, being born in 1878. As a child, he hated the first name actually being Child and would go by Harold for most of his life. As a youth, Harold was very energetic, intelligent, and brittle, not always able to keep his temper in check. His father, John, was a master mechanic, specifically repairing railroad locomotives. Harold showed much interest in his father's work from a very young age, and his father began to teach him how to use the tools of the trade before he even began grade school. The family moved to Detroit, Michigan when Harold was 7, and his father took a job with the Detroit Lubricator Company, which built components for steam engines. Harold would complete his primary education in Detroit, showing not only promise as a mechanical engineer, but also as an artist. His father encouraged him in both endeavors, and once he completed high school, he began an apprenticeship as a mechanical engineer at the same company where his dad worked. During his 4-year apprenticeship, he also took night courses at the local university, studying chemistry, metallurgy, and of course, mechanical engineering. By the age of 21, he was a qualified mechanic and engineer. In 1899, he landed a job at the Boyer Machine Company, later to become the Burroughs Adding Machine Company, and by 1901, at the age of 23, he was their chief engineer. Yet this was, of course, Detroit, and the car bug was all over the city. While working at Boyer, Wills began to moonlight at another company, the Detroit Motor Company, which is where he met Henry Ford. Unfortunately, that company folded, but in 1902, the Henry Ford Company was established, and Ford wanted to make race cars. Wills offered his help in drafting and designing, and together, Ford and Wills designed and built the famous Ford 999, which would be driven to racing success by Barney Oldfield. Unfortunately, this company would also go under after 6 or so months, but Ford would establish the Ford Motor Company in 1903, and Wills would go with him. Harold became Ford's chief designer and metallurgist, basically sharing the chief engineer duties with Ford himself. Such a position usually would require Wills to buy into the company, but he had no money to do so, so Ford offered him 10% of his own stock. Now a true partner in the business, Wills began to seriously apply his engineering and metallurgical knowledge to the design of both Ford models and manufacturing process. Wills was largely responsible for the Model A of 1903, as well as other models for the next few years. Yet there were 3 particular things that Wills did at Ford that would become legendary. One of the issues for making quality cars that Wills saw was the quality of the steel going into them. In Howard's view, the steel available to Detroit automakers was too heavy, rotted quickly in the weather, and was too soft. Thus, a car's chassis could just bend when bouncing down the rough American roads. Howard knew of a solution: nickel-chrome vanadium steel. It was lightweight, resistant to rust, and much more durable. Unfortunately, it was also difficult to produce, and there wasn't a foundry in existence that could make it in any significant quantity. So, Howard reached out to a small foundry in Canton, Ohio, with both an idea and some money. He would buy a large portion of their company and use the money to upgrade their furnaces so that they could actually produce the steel in quantities needed for manufacturing cars. By late 1906, the upgrades were complete, and they were now able to make lots of vanadium steel. The Ford Model N of 1907 was the first car in history to have a body and chassis made from this steel. At the same time, his skills in graphic arts also came to the forefront. His drawings would become advertisements in magazines, on posters, and in newspapers. To go along with this, he also came up with the Ford logo. The silver oval with the stylized Ford script on a blue background. Wills created it, and Ford has used it ever since. Meanwhile, he and Henry were working on the Model T. Harold developed the planetary transmission that the Model T would use. It was similar to the Lanchester Planetary of several years earlier, but with more refinements to increase reliability and durability. The drive controls in both placement and use were of Will's design. When the first Model Ts rolled out of the Ford plant in 1908, much, if not most, of the car was designed by Howard. Unfortunately, tension grew between Wills and Ford during the 1910s, and Wills left Ford right after World War I to create his own make of car, the Wills St. Clair. And that is a tale for another day. Howard Wills was, in many ways, the mind behind Ford, and it's reasonable to say that were it not for Howard Wills, there would not be a Ford Motor Company today. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.